Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not in the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. Here as we resume our trek through Rod's predicted upper half of the Big Ten with number 8, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Much like last episode's 2023 disappointing season, Maryland, Rutgers was also unable to sustain the momentum from years past, but now they've got a fantastic recruiting class, a first of its kind for Rutgers, and a lot of is expected of them this year. Before we begin, a quick word of thanks to all of you who support the show via one-time gifts and on a recurring basis. You can head on over to the finalfoursontheschedule.com/support to offer us support. We really appreciate that. Special thanks to those who are on Patreon supported at the Mateen Cleese level: Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, and Draymond Green supporters: Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, and Daniel Dranak, and all the Scott Scowl supporters as well. And the Substack supporters: Rich Wagenheim and Kenneth Kremet. So again, head on over to the finalfoursontheschedule.com/support to find the necessary links to help keep us on the air. All right, so let's talk about the Scarlet Knights. Again, disappointing year last year, which was not entirely unexpected with the surprising departure for Steve Pikiell. I just suddenly totally blanked at his name.
Cam Spencer and Paul Mulcahy.
Paul Mulcahy was a surprising one. I guess Cam Spencer was somewhat surprising, although he'd been there a year, but Mulcahy especially, that he took off and headed out to and didn't do much out west.
That's the thing. At least in Cam Spencer's case,
he won a national title. Not bad.
Worked out. He won a national title at UConn. He had been very good at Rutgers, and he was better at UConn last year. So it all worked out for him. Not so much for Mulcahy.
And to add injury to insult, Cliff Omoruyi did not really get much better, which left Rutgers finishing 15-17 overall, back to sort of the dregs of the conference at 7-13, which in the conference last year, where everybody was between 8-12 and 12-8, 7-13 seemed like way out of a lot worse. They also finished with the losing season at 15-17 overall, and it's the worst record they had in the league since the 2018 season. But as I mentioned, got some highly regarded recruits coming in, one of the top classes in the country. But we knew that relatively early. Not before the season started, but it seemed like pretty close to when the season was starting. And so everyone's already pretty excited and almost kind of like okay with Rutgers being sort of lousy.
Yeah, but I think this is the problem. It was easier for Rutgers fans to write off last season's struggles for the reason you suggested. They had 2 top 5 national recruits. Now, one of them, Ace Bailey, was committed before the season. The other one, Dylan Harper, was not. But I think there had always been an expectation, or at least from a certain point, there had been an expectation that he would end up at Rutgers, even though it was taking a long time for that to be formalized. And that's because his brother had played there. They had been in on him the longest. He's a native of New Jersey. So a lot of things made that make sense. So there was a lot of confidence. But the problem with that is part of the reason for all the optimism is that the thinking was you're going to drop these 2 elite talents, one and done guys, into a core around them of returning veterans that will make this a very dangerous team. The problem is a lot of those guys who were expected to be that core, Cliff Omoruyi, most foremost among them, opted to leave. So I bet that Steve Pikiell had to go back into the portal to put together a core of a playing group around those 2 freshmen, Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. And I think there's still plenty of reason for optimism at Rutgers. Don't get me wrong.
Sure,
but
you have them eighth.
It's not the feeling, at least for me, that I expected to be having about this team, say, in February. If they were returning all those guys, and it matters in a place like Rutgers too, because so much of their success up until last season, what had happened over the previous 4 or 5 years, is because Pikiell has built an approach, a set of standards in his program that you are expected to meet. And so if you have veterans that have been through it, that's ideal to be adding in highly talented young guys, because those veterans can set the standards. And it's you hope it's a player coach team, and that the standards are reinforced by those veterans, and the younger players kind of fall in the line. When you don't have that, yeah, there's a chance that those young guys will be so good that it won't matter, but there's also a chance that things could start slipping. And that's especially true in terms of the ethos in the Rutgers program, where it's built on disciplined defense, effort stuff, rebounding, all of those kinds of things. Those are areas that can be hard, especially for young players who have a great deal of quote-unquote talent, by which we usually mean offensive ability. It can be hard to get those guys to understand you got to be there as a defender, play to play for 40 minutes. That's the standard at a place like Rutgers. And so that would be the concern, I think, more than anything else, is you've lost so many of those core guys. Can you keep the core elements of the program where you want them while now adding to the potential offensively? This is where I've been talking about this with regard to Steve Pikiell for, 5-6 years at least, maybe even a touch longer than that, that it was going to need to be a patient step-by-step build. And where he started was the area that it's easiest to start from when you lack a lot of high-level talent. And that's make defense and rebounding your calling card. He did that. Right. He built his program on that. And then the idea was, as you get better, as you win a little more, you build credibility, hopefully the next step is you add guys with more offensive ability who can still do the other things that you ask of your team. So you don't lose your identity, you just build on it. And it's taken a while, but they finally got 2 of those guys in Bailey and Harper. Now the question is, do the other things slip?
Yeah. I mean, what you describe, of course, is just culture. And that's what
it is.
We always
it's
talk
culture.
About
Absolutely.
And the question that there's no answer to is how much do you need to retain in order to maintain and sort of hold on to that culture? Or is it just who we have? And we're going to go through this team, and they have only 3 people coming back. They have 10 left. So
right.
it's
nine newcomers. Yeah.
There's not much as far as retention of culture. Now, maybe those 3, to your point, they could be really strong advocates and they could bring, but if not, then everything that Pikiell's built the last 5 years could be gone. And so it's almost like this era is potentially even harder for someone like him at a school that doesn't have a long tradition, that you can build something for a while and build up and then just falls to pieces. And we, in some respects, in a smaller scale, Ben Johnson in Minnesota has kind of got this too, right? He kind of starting to build something and then just, falls apart and he's starting all over again.
Well, and the other thing is those 3 returnees have a grand total between them of 4 years, actually more like 3.5.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Williams didn't play a full year, and really, that's asking a lot. So most coaches will say the best teams are player coach teams. I have a hard time seeing that being the case at Rutgers. I think Steve Pikiell and his staff are really going to have to take the lion's share of the responsibility and hopefully get the message across in a way that still allows them to win at the level they think their talent is now capable of winning.
Right. Well, let's go through the departing players as Rutgers like I mentioned, pretty much cleaned out the house there. If you need your house cleaned, you could contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They will wash your windows. They'll wash your house, whether it's also commercial property, if it's maybe a high rise, whatever you need done. They've even gone all the way out to the state capitol in Michigan and taken care of that too. So the Grand Rapids region is very large. So make sure you contact them if you've got an idea of having them come out and clean your glass, because they did a fantastic job. My house, I can personally say that they were the nicest people that came out. They spent a couple hours at our house meticulously going and cleaning everything, including the screens and all the stuff you never clean up. And the best part is you don't have to get on a ladder and fall down, and then I have to take care of you later on, because I hate taking care of people fall off ladders. And don't be one of those people. So I always have a fear of heights, and it's even worse when I see all those people who have these ladder injuries. So have the guys, the experts do it at Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find ways to contact Troy and his team at our support page at tffinots.com/support. So begin with the player we talked about earlier, Cliff Omoruyi, 6'10" center. Expected him to do a lot more last year, and he just kind of went backwards. He averaged 10.4 points a game on 51, 20, and 61 shooting. Had 8.3 rebounds a game, but both those numbers, they sound good, but they were worse than the year before. He did almost have 3 blocks a game, but he's going to end up leaving, and he's going to head down to Alabama to try and sort of reset.
Yeah, it was disappointing, but on the other hand, I think in retrospect, you can understand why it happened, why the regression happened offensively in particular. He just didn't have the help. Rutgers was not they've never been a great offensive team under Pikiell, but they were better certainly when they had all those guards, and they had a really nice backcourt group 2 years ago. And so Cliff was able to step in at the center spot and really take advantage of that. He had a lot of one-on-one coverage in the post as opposed to being doubled, because teams couldn't double off Spencer. They couldn't really double off Mulcahy either. So he had better, easier scoring opportunities. And I think without as much help around him, it was always going to be a tough deal. And that's what happened. Again, a decent year, 10.4 and 8.3 with 3 blocks a game is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's just not what it needed to be for Rutgers to be better. But then, as I say, with their roster, I don't know if he was ever going to be capable of giving them a lot more than that. The thinking was maybe he'd get back to that kind of production on a team where he didn't have to be the first option, but he didn't stick around to find out. He instead transferred to Alabama. That was in my opinion, a very disappointing loss for Rutgers, because the outlook of this team is different if just that one guy is back.
Yeah. Well, I guess still won't be the first option, but he'll be with a team with.
Exactly. He won't be the option one at Alabama either, but he could have been in that position at Rutgers, and he elected not to be for whatever reason.
Then we have Derek Simpson. He was at a good freshman year last year, struggled a little bit. He was averaged 8.3 points a game, 2.9 assists per game, shot 31, 28, and 86, and he's elected to head over to St. Joseph's.
Yeah, he was really good as a freshman. He was the reserve in that very good guard combination that I mentioned. And I think there was a lot of hope that, well, maybe he'll mitigate the loss of, say, Mulcahy at the point. And it didn't really work out. His counting numbers are not terrible, but as you noted, he was not very efficient. I mean, 31% from the floor, that is not going to cut it. 28% from 3, also not going to cut it. And he wasn't as effective as a playmaker as I think they'd hoped. So he elected to transfer to St. Joseph's. It's a loss in the sense that I think if he'd come back, again, playing with better talent, you probably would have been inclined to bet that he had a decent chance to get back on the beam, so to speak. But he elects to go down to the A10 level at St. Joe's instead.
And then we'll talk about a loss that I think is really reflective of that huge cultural loss. That's Mawot Mag, who I think really epitomized what it was to be a Rutgers basketball player. 6'7" senior forward. He averaged 9.1 points a game and 3.8 rebounds a game. He was still injured last year. People may recall he got injured against Michigan State the prior year. He came back last year, but still battled things a little bit. Shot 39, 25, and 70. He's heading out to BYU, but he definitely embodied everything it was, like the rebounding toughness, defense, all that was sort of Mount Mag.
Yeah, he was just one of those guys. If you remember, when he went out 2 years ago, that's when things got kind of dicey.
Yeah, they
for
went
Rutgers. And it didn't necessarily look like it should have based on his numbers, but you could trace it directly to his absence, I think. If you remember, Rutgers faded hard late. Most people thought they would still get in the tournament. They were a very controversial omission. And again, the fall off largely happened right at the point Mag went out of the lineup. He came back last year, as you say, fought his way through injuries, decently productive. 9 points and 4 boards a game is okay, but didn't shoot very well. Very good defensive player. And again, another guy who, if you had Mag on this roster, boy, you'd feel pretty good. You're like, okay, that's a guy who we can use to hold Ace Bailey accountable.
Right.
And now they don't have that.
Andre Hyatt, 6'6", played last season, and averaged 10.5 points a game and 4.6 rebounds a game, shooting 38, 31, 74, his best season of his career. Yeah,
he was solid last year for them.
Yeah.
He had transferred into the program 2 years ago from LSU. He's from the tri-state area, and so it was kind of a homecoming. And he was decent. 31% from three is not great, but he was enough for threat. You had to deal with him. Gave him solid rebounding, double-digit scorer, but his eligibility is expired.
Then we have Noah Fernandez, 5'11", transfer from UMass. He was played some point, averaged 6.4 points a game, only 1.6 assists to 1.1 turnovers, so not great, playing a little bit of the point. He shot 35, 35, and 83.
Yeah, it wasn't terrible production from an efficiency point of view, at least in terms of shooting the ball, but I think they had hoped for more. They had hoped he could really be a guy that would stem the tide of what they lost offensively with those departures in the backcourt, and he never really grasped the elements of running this team very well. And the shooting was okay, but they had expected maybe a little more there as well. So his eligibility also expired.
And speaking of eligibility expiring, Austin Williams, 6'4", fifth-year transfer guard. He averaged 4 points a game on 47, 38, and 40 shooting.
Yeah, they gave him a boost of perimeter offense, something they sorely needed. But again, no more eligibility. So
Gavin Griffiths, 6'6" freshman who's highly regarded. He's just struggled to get shooting and shot 32, 28, 60, averaged 5.8 points a game, and he's one of the many Big Ten players that was poached by Nebraska.
Yeah, and as I mentioned when we talked about Nebraska, I think this was a really good get for them because it's a ceiling play in that you figure this guy struggled making the adjustment from high school, but he had a reputation as a very good offensive player, very good shooter coming out of high school. And so Fred Hoiberg is betting that after an off year, he can find himself at Nebraska. And I think it's a good bet. I liked when we talked about Nebraska, I had said,
right,
I liked his approach in the portal this year because he had several of those kind of guys where they're coming off down seasons, but the potential's there. You're making a bet on at least some of them finding that. From a Rutgers perspective, again, it's a big loss. Not that you expected that Griffiths would be an all Big Ten player this year, but he had a year in the system, so you would think he'd learned some things or what's expected. You would also think, well, he probably won't struggle that badly shooting the ball again. There's likely some improvement to come, and be great to have another guy who could help you in terms of floor spacing. But he leaves.
Yeah. Yeah, and then another player leaving, Antoine Wolfluck, 6'9", 240-pound big man. He ends up transferring down to the MAC to Miami, Ohio. He certainly was thought maybe with Omoruyi leaving that he might have a bigger role, but again, he's opting to leave. He averaged 3.3 points a game and 3.1 rebounds a game, playing about 13 minutes.
Yeah, I don't understand this one, and I didn't go back to see the timing. Cliff's decision came after it didn't happen immediately. He didn't, if I remember correctly, he didn't hit the portal immediately. And there's a chance, I guess, that Woolfolk might have made his call prior to that. But if he didn't, and even once he did, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me because I thought he was actually pretty impressive both years he had played. And you look at his production last year in 13 minutes a game, that's not bad. And I thought he really showed potential. He wasn't going to be a Cliff replacement fully. But if they had him coming back, then again, you'd feel decent about it. Okay, this guy's had a couple of years in the program. He knows how we play. He's proven that he can do some things at the 5. You know, you'd feel good about that. But he opts to go to Miami of Ohio.
And then we have Antonio Cole, 6'9" forward. He played only a few games to 7, and he ended up going to Howard.
Yeah, that looks to me like a very straightforward transfer down to try to find your level kind of moves.
And for final departing player, Oscar Palmquist, 6'9" forward, who I think, was expected to be able to score and just never really managed to kind of get going. He averaged 2.7 points a game and 1.4 rebounds a game.
Yeah, he was seen as a stretch 4 guy that just never quite found his way into a consistent rotation role for Rutgers. And he had 5 years to try and do it. And it just never quite panned out.
Not good when you even have the COVID year, and that's not even enough to get it
right
to get it figured out. All right, so we'll go to returning players, brought to you by Nudge Printing, our great sponsor. Gabe and Brittany, great Spartans out in Portland, Michigan, where they make all this stuff, all the Spartan gear you can get. Again, fantastic stuff. He's spent a lot of time custom making these hats, and they are super cool. So you got to check it out at thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. You get the link to it, or you just go to nudgeprinting.com and get to there as well. Either way, you get 20% off your order if you type in Final Four just as one word at checkout. I have a ton of stuff. I know Rod's got some stuff. My kids have stuff. My wife has stuff. Everybody loves the Nudge Printing stuff. So you can't go wrong. But with that, they have vintage logos. They've got just modern, regular ones, I guess you call them. Anyway, you can get any of that stuff, and they ship it within, not very long, and it's super high quality stuff. And again, the hats are super cool, like camo Spartan stuff on the inside. You have to check it out and go to nudgeprinting.com to see that. So not many returning players. That'd be a quick segment here. Jeremiah Williams, 6'5" guard. He had provided some help when he came back for the second half of the season. He averaged 12.2 points a game, 3.4 rebounds a game, 2.8 assists per game. Shot 44, 21, unfortunately for them, and 78.
Yeah, and despite that awful 3-point shooting number, the other numbers are solid. And he really has a knack for scoring inside the arc. Good size at 6'5". I wouldn't say he's a pure point guard, but I think he's in a position that he can help. And I would expect that as a returning player, even though it's only half a year of experience, that's more than everybody else has got. And he produced when he played last year. So figure that he factors in a heavy role, and likely, I would think, as a starter somewhere. They would hope for better jump shooting, but that's just never been in the equation, either last year or prior to that at Temple. But I think he's a guy who can help them for sure.
Then we have JaMychal Davis, 6'1" sophomore guard. Started about half the games as a freshman, averaged 5.6 points a game on 37, 22, and 52 shooting.
Yeah, look, as is often the case on Steve Pikiell's teams, Davis earned trust early as a freshman in this case because he could defend the way his coach wanted. And so I think that alone ensures that he's in the rotation again. The shooting numbers are miserable, and they got to get better for him to have a big role. But I think he's going to factor in somewhere just because he can actually guard people the way his coach wants players to be guarded.
And finally, Emmanuel Ogbole, 6'10", 260-pound junior, only played 10 games last year, averaged 2.1 points a game and 2 rebounds a game. So he's got size, but is he going to be somebody who's going to contribute much for them this year?
Well, there just aren't options. I don't see any way that Ogbole isn't at least playing some kind of role, because Rutgers needs 5s. They need somebody who can step in at the 5. That's where the loss of Woolfolk was even bigger in a way, not bigger than Omoruyi, obviously, because there's a difference in quality there, but it just added insult to injury. Because if they had Woolfolk back, you'd feel much more confident. Now you're talking about a combination of a freshman who we'll get to and a junior who hasn't played very much as your only real 5s on the roster. But I don't see any way around it. I think Ogbole has to play at least a reserve role.
Are you saying there's a chance Michigan State will have not the worst 5 spot, according to all its fans?
Very, very probable.
And I think, to your point about the maintaining the culture, we have him, the Ogbole, who played, 10 games, JaMychal Davis, who just was a freshman, only started half the games last season, and Williams, who came from Temple, just played 1 year at Rutgers. So maintaining that.
He played half a year.
Right, half a year.
He didn't play the full season. Yeah,
so,
this is my point.
There's not much
only
there.
3 guys. It's that the 3 guys they're bringing back.
They're like 1.5 guys.
Right. Collectively do not bring a ton of experience. This is very, very fairly viewed as an almost entirely new team.
All right, so let's move on to the newcomers brought to you by the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters. And this will be kind of interesting. Ron will have to tell us which player Big Ten teams will have to keep in the gutter next season. If you need your gutters worked on, and, walk around your property. Do you have puddles? Do you have problems with your water coming in your basement? Do you have lots of piles of leaves on your roof or gutters draining down the side? Or maybe you have a tree growing in your gutter like I did. Whatever the problem might be, take a look at those. They're important to make sure they're functioning properly, and it's super boring, right? No one wants to talk about gutters. But fortunately, there are people who actually specialize in just doing gutters. And so the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters will take care of it. They can clean them out. They can repair them. They can replace them, whether it's your business or your home. And you can stay off that ladder. So stay off the ladder so you don't get hurt. I'm tired of taking care of people on ladders. So make sure the pros do that, because those guys, I don't know, they're just better at it. So they also do other services too. They have things that they have heaters they can put in your gutters. If you have problems with ice buildup or snow buildup, they can put those on to make sure the water stays flowing even in the winter. They also can do the underdecking, the undersealing for under your deck. So you can almost add an extra room on the outside to enjoy more of the outdoors. All right. And then you can find, and you can go to the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support to find ways to get links to that, to either the east side or the west side of the state, wherever you happen to live. 10% off if you mention Final Four when you get in your estimate. All right, so for newcomers, these are the much ballyhooed newcomers. Dylan Harper, who is the brother of Ron Harper Jr., who most people remember. He played at Rutgers for a couple years. He's a 6'5" freshman wing, one of the top recruits in America. He was the one who everyone was super excited about it. And then, like we mentioned, they got a couple others. So he's obviously going to be playing. And now with nobody left on the team, certainly he's going to be playing.
Well, he was seen as the number 1 guy in his class nationally until Cooper Flagg reclassified and assumed that role. But Harper is a consensus. Anybody you talk to, he's top 5. An elite offensive player. His game is a lot like his siblings. If you remember, Ron Harper Jr. was easily the best player, certainly the best offensive player in Pikiell's tenure at Rutgers. And really his arrival was one of the key elements in elevating that program to NCAA tournament caliber, was Dylan Harper's older brother, Ron Harper Jr. If you remember, Ron was kind of a big boy as a wing,
Yeah.
Dylan is in a little better shape than Ron, but I never seemed to hold Ron Harper Jr. back.
Oh.
I mean, I never remember conditioning problems. But Dylan is a similar game. Maybe he's a little thinner, but very, very skilled. He can score at all 3 levels. He's strong enough to use his body to create chances. I think they feel like he'll at least be adequate defensively as a freshman too. It's funny because both of these guys, for those who don't know, their father, Ron Harper Sr., was a long-time NBA player He was on some of those Bulls championship teams in the 90s, for example. But the Ron Harper that you saw on those Bulls teams was not the Ron Harper that I first remember. Because Ron Harper was, and this was an era where MAC teams tended to do very well in the NCAA tournament. And it seemed like every year, every other year, they were producing an NBA level player, and he was one of them. He played at Miami of Ohio. He was an eye-popping athlete. He was one of that first wave of next Jordan types, and there were several. Roy Marble from Flint Beecher played at Iowa. He was one of them. Later, a guy like Harold Miner was one. Kind of in between those guys was Ron Harper Sr. And his first few years in the NBA with Cleveland, he was an eye-popping athlete. And then he got hurt. I believe it was a knee injury. And he fought back from it and found a way to still be a very effective NBA player, but he wasn't the same guy that he had been prior to that athletically. He had to find other ways to compete. His sons are not anywhere close to the kind of athlete that he was. So it's interesting. You expect those genes to pass, and doesn't always work that way. But on the other hand, at least this son was much, much more highly regarded as a high school player than his father or his brother were. It was basically down, as I recall, it was down to Rutgers and Duke. So that tells you where it was with him. I expect him to be successful as a freshman. I think he's going to be an outstanding player. He's probably a one-year guy. You never know for sure, but I would bet on that at this point. And Rutgers needs him to be every bit as good as advertised.
And speaking of, not only does Rutgers have one top 5 recruit, they actually have 2. And so the next one is Ace Bailey, who is less a legacy recruit and so more of an impressive, I think, in some respects, recruit for Pikiell.
Yeah.
6'9", big-time athlete, also seen as a one-and-done lottery pick. Can play the 4 and the 3. So, quite a 1-2 punch here from Rutgers in the recruiting trail.
Yeah. It's funny because at least until maybe late in the process, Harper was generally considered to be the better recruit. I think it became tighter as their senior seasons unfolded, not because Harper was bad, but because Bailey just kept growing on people. And when you look at Bailey, he would be the guy who probably projects even a little better to the NBA because he is a big-time athlete, and he's 6'9", and he's skilled. So he's got the total package in that way. As you said, capable of playing the 4 and the 3. I could see him playing both positions, and I think he probably will. There are some questions about him. The feeling is that his shot selection can get off at times, and he maybe has some possession-to-possession inconsistency defensively. But look, there's no doubt he's another guy like Harper who's going to be an instant impact guy. And these two are the reason why there's been so much enthusiasm. I was trying to think about this as we've been talking. The last time, forget Rutgers, because it's never happened there. The last time a Big Ten program had 2 top 5 guys in the same class, I believe it was the case for Ohio State when they had Greg Oden and Mike Conley, I think.
Oh, okay.
Michigan State, Tom Izzo's had it once in my recollection with Marcus Taylor and Zach Randolph. I can't think of too many other examples. I may be missing one, but the point is it does not happen often.
It's certainly
and
not
it's
at
happened to Rutgers.
Yeah. Well, that's the lightning in a bottle, right? And you have to take advantage of that. So that'll be
absolutely. And that's why I think it has to be, look, they may be able to figure it out as we're going to talk about the rest of these new guys, but it has to be so disappointing for Rutgers fans to think about what the experience you would have had coming back to surround these guys with. And now you're having to fit in an almost entirely new team around them. It might work out, but it's disappointing to think about what might have been.
Moving on to Tyson Acuff, 6'4" combo guard, transferred from Eastern Michigan. He averaged 21.7 points a game, Shot 42-3, 29 and 81. Also averaged 2.8 assists per game. Had a knee injury this summer, expected back in October, but you never know with the knee injuries what your effectiveness is going to be.
That's the question mark with him, is health. Tyson Acuff is a Detroit native. You may recognize that last name.
Yeah.
His younger brother, Darius Acuff, is a top 10 guy nationally, point guard, who also, he started his career at Cass Tech, ended up transferring to prep school for his last couple of years. And he's going to be with John Calipari at Arkansas next year. But his older brother has kind of just steadily grown over his college career to the point that the last couple of years at Eastern, been a big-time scorer. I mean, Mac or no, 21.7 points a game is 21.7 points a game. And although he, too, is not a pure point guard, I think he's capable. Rutgers is probably going to have to do the point guard thing by committee. And I think if he's healthy, he will be part of that along with Williams and Davis. They don't have any one guy that I think steps forward as the obvious candidate, but I think they're hoping collectively they can get the job done. The three-point shooting for Acuff is not great, but he's obviously proven to be capable of scoring in other ways. And I think if he's healthy, he's definitely in the Rutgers rotation somewhere. Maybe he's a starter, maybe not, but he's going to play.
All right. Next, we have 6'6" wing who played for the Merrimack Warriors basketball team, Jordan Durkak. 17 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, and 3.9 assists per game. But he also averaged 4 turnovers a game. He shot 47, 28, and 72. So he's obviously making a huge move up. Oh, and also, I guess, of note, he got to the foul line a lot, almost 8 times a game.
Yeah, his profile looks a little bit to me like Frankie Fiddler's. I don't think it's as reliable. He certainly doesn't shoot as well. But the fact that he's a wing who can do a number of different things, and he has a demonstrated ability to get to the line to draw contact, those are all positives. And I could see him contending to start opposite Harper on the wing. There's a reasonable chance of that. The three-point shooting, again, as we say with a lot of the guys on this team, not what you would like to see, but the other elements are intriguing. And I think regardless of whether he's starting or not, Durkak's going to play a lot. But you have to like the ability to be dynamic, to do a number of different things, and also a demonstrated skill at drawing contact.
Then we have shaken but not stirred, Zach Martini, 6'8", transfer from Princeton, averaged 8.4 points a game, 3.3 rebounds a game, shot 45, 39, and 83.
It seems like forever Rutgers has been waiting for somebody to step forward and actually be a stretch four. They've had a million guys we've talked about it, and it just never seems to come to fruition in terms of consistency shooting. Maybe Martini can be part of the answer there. 39% from three for Princeton. So he did it at the Ivy level. Can he do it at the Big Ten level? I don't think he starts because I think Ace Bailey is probably your starting four, but he's going to play. And if he can give them some shooting, this is a team that is just, you look at all these shooting numbers, and so many of these guys that are going to be playing minutes are either freshmen or they're sub 30% three-point shooters. Something's got to give. They got to find some guys that could stick a three. And Martini, if he can do that, he'll play.
Yeah, and at least at Rutgers before, you're like, well, we can always rely on our defense, and that'll get us through, and we don't have to have great scoring. But now, you don't know. So you may have to start going to these guys who shoot better. Maybe they can't defend either, but at least they can score. PJ Hayes will be next, 6'6" wing from San Diego. That's quite the journey. He averaged 10.5 points a game, 3.1 rebounds a game, shot 43, 40, and 79.
Again, he's proven to be able to shoot effectively at a lower level. If he can if at least some of that translates, there probably are minutes for PJ Hayes because Rutgers is going to need shooting. There's no doubt about that. So there's a chance for him.
Then we have Lathan Somerville, 6'10", 230-pound freshman. He's a post first offensive player and borderline top 100 recruit. So compared to the other two, he's not nearly as impressive, but still pretty good recruit for Rutgers in most years.
Yeah, and I think, look, if Cliff had come back, that would have been ideal.
Yeah.
If Woolfolk had come back, it would have been decent. Because in either of those instances, I think Pikiell could have said, okay, we're going to get this kid, 15 minutes a night, let him kind of ease his way into understanding how we play. And then next year when we need him, he'll be ready to step up. Well, he doesn't have that luxury. And I think there's a reasonably good chance Somerville starts immediately, which is not ideal because you don't know whether he's truly going to be ready for that. They like his low post offensive game. They think in time he can be an effective rebounder and defender. But, Rutgers has had really, really strong defensive play at the 5 basically the entire time Pikiell's been there.
Yeah.
Playing a true freshman is not necessarily a recipe for good odds to continue that. We'll see, but I just don't see an option, unless they decide to go crazy and maybe play Bailey as a small ball 5, which I don't think would be likely to make anybody happy. But unless they do that, I don't see a way where Somerville doesn't play a significant role. He almost has to. And maybe this is good. Maybe force feeding him minutes accelerates his development process, but it's not, I'm sure it's not the equation Pikiell was thinking about when he got his commitment.
Then we have a kid who played basketball in Warren, Michigan, 6'7", 210-pound Dylan Grant, who's a freshman coming into Rutgers.
Yeah, he's a Canadian who played his high school basketball. I think it was at Warren Collegiate. He played for the family at AAU. I like him. He's a guy that just seemed to continually improve over his time in high school. And I think he's a good addition for Rutgers in the long run. Versatile defensive player. And what I noticed, at least in watching him over the course of a few years, is his offensive game seemed to steadily improve. That you'd feel better about him if he was maybe a couple inches taller. If he was 6'9", 210, I'd say, oh yeah, this is a guy who can help you as potentially even a 5, but definitely a 4. He started to show later in his high school career a little bit of a perimeter game. I wouldn't say he's a 3-point shooter yet, but he showed some ability to hit the mid-range. He's a high-energy guy, glue guy type, plays hard, does a lot of things to help you win without necessarily stuffing the stat sheet. I think he's got a chance to be a good developmental player, but they're going to have to keep him. And I don't know, unless things really get weird at the 5, if I'd expect that he plays much this year. But I like him as a long-range prospect if they can keep him around.
That's always a big if.
Yeah.
And finally we have Bryce Dortch, 6'8", 200-pound forward from Massachusetts.
Yeah, a little bit different than Grant in terms of his game. He's more of a good ball skills guy. He can shoot a little bit. But I think a similar situation overall in that I find it unlikely that he's going to play a ton as a true freshman. Guy who probably looks more like a developmental player.
So when Big Ten teams face Rutgers, which is the player they'll need to keep in the gutter the most?
It's a tough call because it really comes down to the 2 freshmen.
Of course.
Flip a coin. I'm going to go with Harper because I think he's likely to maybe have the ball in his hands a little bit more, but it's close. If it ends up being Ace Bailey as their best player, it is not a shocker at all. I'm going to go with Harper.
All right, thanks to the Brothers Suggest You Gutters for that segment. And then finally, we'll close here. The overall thoughts of Rutgers basketball team. I mean, this is a team that has now missed the tournament, which is funny. We're saying this like it's shocking that they missed the tournament in the last 2 years, where where they weren't even competitive in the Big Ten forever. And now and I think, our thought, certainly last year before all these departures, that, as you mentioned, are they going to contend for Big Ten title? Yeah, they might be in the mix a little bit. Now I don't think they're probably there. I mean, you never know how phenomenal these players are going to be, but you still have them penciled in here as 8th in the Big Ten, which is, upper half. So you have them in the tournament. This is probably like a safely in the tournament, but like a low seed, like an 8 or 9 or something like that.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that directly translates. You're right about how that appears, but there's no guarantee that Rutgers doesn't finish 13th.
Sure. Yeah.
There's this group of teams that all have serious questions, and I think that's my most obvious takeaway with regard to Rutgers is these are the most questions we've seen with a Rutgers team in several years under Pikiell. He's had groups that it always seems like he had a decent number of guys back. Like that get old, stay old thing. That seemed to be the way he was running things. And now he doesn't have that. 3 returning players and not a ton of experience among those 3 guys, and then 9 newcomers. So you're talking about very much an overhauled roster. And I think because there's so many new faces and also because of the kinds of players they've added, I think this is likely to be a different kind of Rutgers team than we're used to seeing. You would think that Harper and Bailey alone ensure that this team is better offensively. And that's not even factoring in anybody else.
Right.
And I think that's a safe bet. And it's not like that's an incredibly difficult bar to clear anyway, right? So,
no.
But you do have other guys. You got Williams playing for a full year. Acup, if he's healthy. Durkak and Martini seem to be capable of adding some shooting. You put all that in, it's easy to envision a team that maybe is substantially improved offensively. I don't think anybody's going to confuse them for Purdue anytime soon or Gonzaga, but they're going to be a better offensive team. The only question is how much better. But I think the more fundamental question that goes along with that, which you've alluded to a couple times, is, okay, fine. Offensively, we can all agree they're likely to be at least somewhat better and maybe a lot better. But what about the defense and what about the rebounding? Because those are the program staples that have made Rutgers what it's been under Steve Pikiell. They've been a top 20 adjusted defense in 4 of the past 5 seasons. But you're talking about maybe, I would say likely from my perspective, 3 freshmen starting, and then add in possibly another transfer, probably another transfer. That could be 4 out of 5 guys that are new starters. And the 5th guy started, I don't know, half the year.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that you could have that and not see some slippage defensively. I don't think they're going to be, down in Fran McCaffrey territory. I think Steve Pikiell knows how to teach defense. The system he runs, he'll get at least adequate defense out of them. But Rutgers hasn't just been adequate. For the last 5 years in the top 20, they've been exceptional. Can this group be exceptional? That might be a tall task. And then you think about rebounding. I think their perimeter spots actually load up very, very nicely. Harper's got rebounding ability. Bailey has it. Durkic, we said, averaged 6 boards a game from the wing. And then Jeremiah Williams is a 6'5" point guard. Acup is 6'4". That's something to think about. They're going to have a lot of perimeter size. They may not be huge in the center spots necessarily, although they're not super short there either, but this is going to be a very big team across the board. Not a lot of small players on this roster. At least they're going to be in the playing group. It's basically, what's the kid's name? Davis is the only one who's likely to be in the playing group who's below 6'4". PJ Hayes is 6'6". So it's a big team in that way, but can all of that offset the fact that they don't have proven players at the 5 and allow Rutgers to still be a very good rebounding team, which they've been more often than not under Pikiell. So I think that's where the major questions are. You could also, if we're really getting into the nitty gritty here, I think the fact that they don't have an obvious answer at the point is another question mark to deal with. But again, I think some of the individual offensive talent is going to be too hard to ignore. That's going to provide some improvement just on that basis alone. So from my perspective, I think the talent upgrade puts Rutgers back into the tournament discussion. And if Harper and Bailey are as good as advertised, that can change the equation for Rutgers. But at the same time, I think all of these question marks and all of this roster turnover makes it hard for me to put them in the likely upper tier of the Big Ten. And there's also downside from where I've got them, for sure. You know, we've seen over the last few years, basically since the portal era kicked in, if you're relying on true freshmen, you're probably in trouble.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
I won't say Rutgers is exclusively relying on that, but a lot is riding on that. Now, they are, at least 2 of them are exceptional freshmen by every account. But where does that put you in the greater scheme of things? I think that's an open question. I'm going to say I think they're more likely than not to be a tournament team, but I definitely think there's downside risk too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, we don't know, and certainly getting Dylan Harper was not dependent on NIL because there's definitely ties to Rutgers. But Bailey, there had to have been NIL money available, and so there has to be a decent NIL situation at Rutgers, at least adequate.
No, and that's what makes the Ace Bailey thing so strange. He's not from that area. I believe he's from Georgia. And I don't understand it, frankly, because, well, 2 things. One, I think a common perception that people have that I am not of the understanding is true is that NIL is often a major factor with high school recruits. It can be a little bit, and I'm sure Ace Bailey is getting something.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, most schools are deploying the vast majority of their NIL money for portal guys, not for high school guys. You kind of have to do that year, and I'll put it this way. I am, let's call it semi-well educated on the fact that Michigan State's 2B sophomores are making more now than they were last year coming out of high school. The amount that you spend to retain guys or bring guys in from other schools, that tends to be the focus for NIL. And in fact, and I'm glad you brought this up, because it does answer, if you're listening to us talk about this, saying, why would all these guys leave Rutgers?
Yeah, sure.
The suggestion has been that part of the reason over the last couple of years they've suffered these losses has been NIL related. It absolutely was in terms of Cam Spencer and Paul Mulcahy, which is funny to think about Washington spending more than Rutgers, but apparently that was the case. I mean, I heard that enough that it seemed reliable. I think in terms of the guys that lost this year, at least a couple of them, I suspect NIL was an issue with Omoruyi. Mm-hmm. I absolutely think that. And it may have been a problem with a couple of other guys too. So that is something, and I only say this because I've seen enough Rutgers people lamenting this, that they believe they've got an NIL problem. So, and it would explain, at least in part, why they've been suffering all these portal losses.
Yeah, well, and certainly you look at Rutgers from outside NIL, their athletic department, I believe, has been one that loses a lot of money.
Absolutely.
They are very losing athletic department. So, even if you move to a different era without NIL, contracting, they're going to be at probably a disadvantage there as well.
They really need, and I think this is what the sense I have is this is what they've been trying to do with, limited success, is they really need to find some people to kind of bankroll this thing.
Yeah.
As crass as that might sound to some of our listeners, it's the truth. You know, a program like St. John's, same area of the country, that was one of the things, as I understand it, that led to Rick Pitino taking that job, is that he knew there were some benefactors lined up who were going to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and help St. John's be competitive in player acquisition. And that's exactly what's happened, you know, and it's what's going on. If you're wondering why BYU, of all places, is suddenly a player for talent, they may land the top. In fact, the last I saw is they're considered at least the slight favorite to land the top player in the 2025 class. Why? They've got NIL lined up. So Rutgers has been trying to do that. It's thus far been only sporadically successsul. You got to give them credit for getting Bailey. And I don't know all the ins and outs of how they did that, but I don't think, I'm not under the impression that was one of these deals where somebody came in and promised a kid $1 million. That's just not happening with incoming freshmen all that much, if at all.
It's surprising that you could be an athletic department like Rutgers with the contract that they have through the Big Ten and still find yourself with a massive deficit. I just don't quite understand.
Well,
it's not like there are that many more sports, but they must have a lot of spending elsewhere or something that's out of line with a lot of other programs.
It reminds me of an old line. I can remember, I think it was Scottie Pippen was a free agent, and he signed for the time, a very lucrative deal. And it was like a year later or 2 years later, he was in financial trouble. And somebody asked, and I'm just using these, I don't know these are the exact numbers, I'm just using these as an example. The line was, how does a guy who's making $40 million a year run into financial trouble? And the answer is when his annual budget is $50 million.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So
no
I don't
question.
know all the ins and outs. I am under the same impression you are in terms of what Rutgers' overall departmental health is. It's a problem. At two schools, Nebraska's fine. They added Maryland and Rutgers, and both of them came into the Big Ten with huge financial issues in their athletic departments. Huge. And I think the likely answer is that Rutgers had a giant hole, and so that all that Big Ten football contract money is filling some of the hole, but not all of it.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going on.
So let's doom prep just for a moment here too before we finish up looking at Rutgers. Like if you're Steve Pikiell, let's say this year does not go well, which is entirely possible, right? You're relying on freshmen, maybe somebody gets injured or whatever,
and it would
you
be
miss
a big problem. It would be a big problem too, because
let's say miss exactly, expectations are high. But not only do you miss a tournament, now you've missed it 3 years in a row. But let's say you finish like 8-12 in the league, or 7-13 or something like that. And you're going to lose 9 players next year again. This is everything he built could be crumbling, and then he may just never get back on. I mean, it's not an impossible scenario to see play out that can happen to this guy. And so I imagine there's got to be a lot of pressure for him, even though you could say, well, they're freshmen, but you got them 1 year. I don't know. I mean, you could see this thing just blowing up, and it may not. I'm not saying it would, but there's definitely a lot of danger here for Rutgers.
Well, only insofar as it may dash some dreams as to how good this program can be. They've had this. Let's keep it within reason. They had that run of whatever it was, 3 straight tournament seasons. I think it was 3. Would have been 4, but for the lost 2020 tournament, because they were in position to make it. But Rutgers was not close to being a Big Ten title contender in any of those years. No. They were good, solid teams, but that's all they were. And they weren't ever a team that people looked at in any of those seasons and said, oh, this is a team I could see maybe if things break the right way, getting to a Final Four. That wasn't seen either. So I think what it would do is it would probably, as I say, it would it would sort of stamp out the dreams that some might have of Rutgers really being a contender for anything other than an occasional tournament bid.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to fire Steve Pikiell. I would be absolutely floored.
Well, not after this year, for no matter what happens. Yeah.
Well, and I would say he's got a long leash. Short of the obvious guys, the Tom Izzos, the Matt Painters, and there aren't many of those. He might have as long a leash as anybody in the Big Ten.
Right.
Seriously, because what? How can you in good conscience say, "Oh, we got to get rid of this guy"? What? I don't care what he does. I mean, short of going like 1-30, but I think it might. I'll say this: what it might do is it might lead Steve Pikiell to maybe think about making a move. Because if the reality is that I'm right and that NIL has been behind a lot of this roster instability, then he would have to take a cold, honest look at it and say, is this ever going to change? And if it doesn't change, can I do the things here that I thought I might have been able to 4 years ago? And the answer to those questions might very well be no. And if they're no, Steve Pikiell, this would not be the ideal time to be looking to move, given that he'd be coming off 3 straight non-tournament years. He would probably need to wait until he got them back to the tournament. But you would wonder if he might think about looking to make a move. I don't think he's the easiest sell. His style of play is not one that's going to be aesthetically pleasing to a lot of people. And so you might have trouble winning the press conference in some schools. But I think he's a very good coach. Obviously, he's proven that. But you just have to wonder, like, what does that do to his perception? What does that do? Again, I don't think the school would be looking to move on from him, even if this doesn't work. But it would definitely create questions. And, we look back like 12 months ago. God, you're coming off, a year where you missed the tournament, but most people thought you should have been in. And, you might struggle a little bit this season, but, the year after that, we're going to be ready to go. And now there's still a chance for that to happen, but it looks less likely than it did 12 months ago. I think that's fair to say. And so, it's going to be a fascinating year at Rutgers. We've never said that Rutgers had this much intrigue around its program as it will have this year. People will want to see Rutgers play just for those 2 freshmen alone.
Oh,
they will be a team that television is interested in. They're probably going to get better game placement than they're typically used to having. I don't think they play much of a non-conference schedule, if I remember correctly. But once they get into Big Ten play, I will not be surprised if you're seeing Rutgers games in better windows than they've historically been in,
All right. Well, we'll leave it there until we go to the number 7 team. So until then, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.